We are Penn State, currently the head football coach of the blue and white Penn State Lions is still James Franklin. He took over for Bill O'Brien, who took over for Joe Paterno. Franklin's been at the helm since 2014. It is currently about 8 p.m. Eastern Time this Saturday night, October the 11th, 2025. Penn State just fell once again today, falling to 3-3 on the season here in the 2025 campaign. After high hopes and aspirations, coming off of a college football playoff appearance in the Final Four last year, losing on a game-winning field goal to Notre Dame, a one-score game nonetheless, and a few prior to that. From the start of the 24 season last year, losing to Ohio State by one score, Oregon by one score in the Big Ten championship game, and then Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl on the game-winning field goal. Enter 2025 with playoff hopes and dreams, beginning 3-0, but Penn State's now lost 3 straight games, all by one score, I might add, in double overtime 2 weeks ago in the whiteout against the Oregon Ducks, as they quacked into Happy Valley and flew back home with a win before they lost today. We'll get more into that in a little bit. But then Penn State went to the Rose Bowl, not the Rose Bowl game, but they won with head coach James Franklin at the end of the 2022 season on January the 2nd, 2023, a few years ago, but losing to the UCLA Bruins last Saturday afternoon, and then returned home for homecoming this weekend with the Throwback Generations Greatness uniforms. But that's neither here nor there right now. As coaches coach, players play. Penn State losing 22-21 to Northwestern just a short time ago. It seems that this Penn State football team is broken, and enough is enough. I feel like the past 11 years, 12 seasons for Penn State football with James Franklin as the head football coach has officially run its course, and I believe it's time for this relationship to come to an end, whether that is Penn State firing James Franklin, him leaving on his own accord, which he has had numerous chances to do in the past, away from what he calls Penn State, his dream school, as he is a Pennsylvania native, and was hired away from Vanderbilt at the end of the 13 season, and has been the head football coach of the Pennsylvania State University since January of 2014. And obviously, as he likes to say a lot, and that he gets it, I do want to say thank you for all the wins, but I think it's time to move on, and Penn State needs to make a move, whether that be from now until the end of the night, tomorrow sometime, or at season's end. Once again, whether that is paying the buyout from the latest contract extension that I was getting to. As mentioned, he's had chances to leave, and he has stayed true, and he has stayed here at Penn State in central Pennsylvania State College University Park, right here in Happy Valley. Once again, we are Penn State. Thanks to Nittany Nation for joining and watching this video here on YouTube. In the meantime, let me introduce myself. As always, I'm your host, Encyclopedia Sports, Coin Luke 96. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on social media. That'll be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Hit that red subscribe button, notification button next to it as well. To stay up to date, once again, links in the description below. Thumbs up button if you're a Penn State fan. Thumbs up button if you want James fired. Or to just officially move on from being the head coach of the Penn State Lions. As, like I said, Penn State ended up losing once again today. It's very frustrating as a Penn State fan right now, no doubt about it. It's just not being able to catch a break, and if it ain't one thing, it's another. But once again, the coaches coach and the players play, and it starts at the top with head coach James Franklin. As I feel personally, I think a lot of people are in agreement. Let me know in the comments below. But that this relationship has officially run its course, and it's time, and it's best on both sides for both parties involved to move on and go their separate ways. So once again, whether that's Penn State firing, him leaving on his own accord, which that money's going to be way less than what the buyout is. We'll get into the details in a minute, but or if there's some sort of mutual agreement, which I highly doubt will happen, just because of life and business and money and just how the world works. But as I was saying, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on social media. Links in the description below. Thumbs up button. Be sure to share as well. Hashtag college football. Hashtag Penn State. Chat questions and comments. Super chat, super stickers, super likes, super thanks. Always greatly appreciated. As well as this video is powered by Rogue Energy, HopeKThrifts, and Dead and Hungry. So shout out to them real quick before we dive into what is going on right now with Penn State football, but more so than not, what, in my opinion, the future could hold for the blue and white. As we're now halfway officially done with the 2025 season. Penn State's sitting at 3-3. College football playoff is out of the picture. Bowl game before too long, if not already, might also be out of the picture as we'll get into what's coming up in the second half with the schedule. But just moving, on into the rest of 2025, but then into 2026 and beyond. But to infinity with Rogue Energy, HopeKThrifts, and Dead and Hungry. As mentioned, this video is powered by Rogue Energy, HopeKThrifts, and Dead and Hungry. First off, Rogue Energy. Be sure to get your favorite energy and hydration flavors in can or tub form, shakers, and Rogue Energy merch at the link in the description below. Be sure to use the code Luke, that's Luke123, for 10% off. HopeKThrifts is a secondhand resale shop that focuses on staying in the environment in a cheap and fashionable way, as most items are $20 or less and include brands like American Eagle, Converse, Free People, and Shein, among others. HopeKThrifts found on Depop, Instagram, Mercari, and Poshmark at, yes, you guessed it, HopeKThrifts. It's HopeKThrifts, HopeKThrifts. So be sure to use the message seller code CHEAPTHRIFTS, CHEAPTHRIFTS, CHEAPTHRIFTS for 10% off. Link also in the description below. And then Dead and Hungry, a novel written by Nathan D. Mitchell. You can find it on Amazon. And once you do, go check that out and buy on Amazon. If that doesn't interest you, you might as well be what the title says. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to scan the QR code behind me, or you can click the first top link in the description below. And then if available, if there is a hype button, a hype option on your YouTube screen, be sure to click hype. And once again, thanks for tuning in and watching, as we're just going to discuss, Penn State football and what the future holds. This is not a live play-by-play watch-along reaction stream. Live here on YouTube with myself, your host, Encyclopedia Sports, Co-and Luke 96, for either Penn State football, Pittsburgh Steelers football, or professional wrestling for that matter. But just be sure to subscribe, notification bell next to it as well, so you can stay up to date. So, really, where to begin, I don't know. We're just gonna, dive into this and talk. I have no notes other than what I've discussed at the end of a handful of games in the past, because I've talked about this in the past. But, more so than not, last Saturday after the UCLA loss, and then I spoke about it a little bit ago at the end of the Northwestern game, but I thought to myself, and I even stated that, what's the point of talking about it, once again, even though that's what I'm going to be doing, but, because I've talked about this at the end of the 2015 season, middle of 2016 season, middle of the 20 season after they started 0-5, at the end of the 21 season, obviously, last week, and then again today, but I'm like, I'm just going to make a separate video for this. So this technically is a live stream. We are live on YouTube right now, but I'm like, I'm just going to make another video compared to, doing that and then editing and clipping and, doing everything I'd have to do on that end of all of that, just to make a separate video, and I can just go out and still make a separate video by itself. So here we are. So thanks once again for tuning in and watching. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Links in the description below. And let me know at any point in time with anything I say, whether you agree, disagree, whatever the case may be. But in the comments below, always greatly appreciated. But just, the state of Penn State football right now is, they're flat out not that good. They're not. I hate to break it to you. I hate to burst your bubble and say that. It hurts saying it, as a diehard, Penn State Nittany Lion fan. Bleeding blue and white. I've been a Penn State fan my whole entire life. And, I get you got to go through the bad to get to the good, but that's the thing with James Franklin as the head coach. It's the same old, over and over again. Bullshit out of a car salesman's mouth, and into the universe, and, they're coaching and playing, and, at times good, at times not so good. But yeah, obviously before I do, really dive into this, because I think it's at this rate only a matter of time, not if, but when, that James Franklin no longer will be the head football coach of Penn State, and it will be somebody else into 2026 and the future. But once again, to thank you to James Franklin for all the wins, because he did, as O'Brien came into a tough situation, taking over for Joe after the scandal. That's that. I'm not getting into that. We know what happened there, but 409 forever. We are Penn State for Joseph Vincent Paterno Field now at Beaver Stadium, not whatever the hell they're calling it. But if they have $700 million, to currently do a stadium renovation, Penn State, whether that's coming from the university, boosters, I don't really give a shit where the money's coming from. If I had it myself, I feel like if anybody, had it themselves and they were as sick and tired as, Penn State fans have become with James Franklin, they would be handing over the money to him themselves, for that matter. But if they have money, to be doing a stadium renovation, I get NIL and this and that, but coaches coach, players play. Any coach can coach. Any coach can recruit. It's what you put on the field. But that if they have $700 million to do a stadium renovation, they have $56 million to buy out James Franklin and send his ass packing to I don't care where. Okay, at this rate, like I said, I feel like it's time that this ends, and both sides go their separate ways, and just everybody moves on. I get the grass ain't always greener on the other side, because not too often do coaches with 100+ wins, get fired. He's actually still trying to tie, or he is tied, with Rip Engel, but he is still trying to surpass Rip Engel. James Franklin is. Rip Engel was the head coach before Joe Paterno, if you did not know, from 1950 to 1965. Joe took over in '66 and was the head coach until 2011. O'Brien in 12 and 13, and James has been at Penn State since 2014. Here we are, halfway through 2025 already. Holy hell, where's the time gone? I know. But he's still trying to surpass Rip Engel to become the second all-time winningest coach in Penn State football history, only behind Joe Paterno with 409 wins. But Penn State also fired Joe Paterno with those 409 wins. I get the situation. That is what it was. Agree, disagree. I'm not getting into it, but JVP 409, forever we are Penn State. It feels like there's something from up above that's, holding them back, and no, you're not becoming second all-time winningest coach in Penn State football history at this rate, because he could have become that 3 weeks ago if they would have beat Oregon. But they haven't won since 2 weeks prior to that. They haven't won in a month. They're 3-3 now. And they play at Iowa next Saturday night before another bye week. And then you get into November, they go to Ohio State, and we know big game James. But then they host Indiana, who went to Oregon today and won. But then at Michigan State for the Land-Grant Trophy. Nebraska, we'll talk about the Cornhuskers. That's the senior day game right before Thanksgiving. And then Penn State goes to Rutgers to end the regular season. But they're 3-3 right now. And you look at that, schedule down the stretch. I mean, maybe 6 wins at this rate with the way they're playing. And Drew Aller suffered an injury in today's game. And it looks like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. And, seemingly then at that rate too, his college career's going to be over as he's a fourth-year senior. I mean, he can ask for a medical red shirt. I don't know if the NCAA is going to grant that. They might not. So, just not his season being done. His college career and Penn State career might be over. Obviously, James would probably use that as not an excuse, but just, throw it on the table. Make it a point of discussion, throw it at the wall, see what sticks, basically, of, well, our quarterback's hurt, and now, we got a backup in there, and blah, blah, blah. You got to give me some more time. You've had time. You've been in situations with, quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks, and, this and that. Obviously, we know Penn State football, it's the run game, it's the defense. Penn State's never been a quarterback school. They haven't, if you didn't know. Penn State's linebacker yield. Then it also boils down to, well, James Franklin, you're supposed to be a damn good recruiter. We'll see what the future holds. I will say, if he sticks around somehow, some way, there's going to be a few assistants that are going to be scapegoats. Whether that be Andy Kotelnicki as the offense coordinator, he's gone through, I couldn't even tell you the exact number of offense coordinators now since he took over in 2014. It's getting close to almost 10. Defensive coordinators, he's only had a couple. But then when they left, they went to become, head coaches. Um, so, I mean, yeah, obviously, you're supposed to score points. Defense wins championships. You got to rely on special teams. But um, as I was saying, just with, I don't want to get off track here, too much, but um, they're sitting at 3-3, and I just feel, like I said last week, potentially the nail in the coffin, for James Franklin. Well, that was last week. All right. Today, losing to Northwestern to fall to 3-3. They're 0-6 against the spread, I might add. Okay. They were favorites against Oregon, not by much. Lost in double overtime. But a couple touchdown favorites last week and today, and then they lose. Obviously, all one-score losses. So, what, 6 of those since the start of last year? And, hey, you got to find a way to win those. Whether they're, it's this game, that game, whatever game. Obviously, his nickname is Big Game James. And now he's not even winning the, games that you would think Penn State would be winning, for that matter. So it's like that line in the sand of, all right, we're either way past this and it's time, or you're still on the fence. I think, today would be the dirt being shoveled on top of them, if you catch my drift, with just, it needs to be done and over with, and, just don't want to obviously dig my own grave, or Penn State digging their own grave for that matter. And okay, you're going to, as I get back on track here a little bit, like I said, not too often do, whether it be a school, program, university, or, an NFL team, or whatever type of franchise, that you own in whatever sport it is, not too often do head coaches with, a lot of wins, get fired. But then when you also have X amount of losses, he's technically now, I believe, 104-45 after today's loss, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but you can look it up, with social media and Google and, the internet, for that matter, the way technology is. But, and thanks once again for tuning in and watching, but it's like, you really want to do this? Because then there's no going back. But then it's always, well, you'll never know if you didn't at least take the chance. And then you got to live with it one way or another. And it's like, are you content with continuing on with what you have, or are you, ready to move on? And like I said, I feel like with Penn State and Indian Nation, I mean, you heard the boos last week on the road, for God's sakes, let alone today at home on homecoming. That, and I'm sure a lot of people in their own homes, like myself, watching on TV for that matter, whether you're yelling at the TV, throwing shit at the TV, buying a new TV because you broke it, whatever the case may be, it's just a lot of frustration, and it's like, that's what I said, it's the same old, and it's like, when is enough? Well, I feel like I said, that time has come. Enough is enough with James Franklin as the head football coach of Penn State, and it's time to move on. So, Penn State, we'll see what they do. Obviously, the decision is still in their court, but I don't think James Franklin needs to be the head football coach of Penn State moving forward. Like I said, that's tonight, tomorrow, next week, say next Sunday, going into the bye week, within a month to play, or at the end of the season, and whether it's a buyout and you pay it, or, he leaves on his own to where, I don't know, I don't care. Wish him luck, not really. but thanks for everything here, one of those situations, or do they come to a mutual, parting of ways, with some sort of severance package, but contract's a contract. And back on track again here a little bit, like I said, he's had numerous chances to leave for a handful of different schools. I'm not going to get into those because obviously they've, since been filled. And I mean, it's not like he's, probably going to go to one of those right now anyway, but who knows, because nobody knows what the future holds. There's currently only a couple jobs open. If Penn State would open, it would be, top of the market, top of the line, as Penn State's a blue blood in all of college football. It'd arguably be, the best job potentially, just not this cycle, but over the past couple years. Because we talked about it before, yeah, okay, you want to replace a legend, but then you don't. And then the situation Penn State was in 12, at the end of the 11 season going into 12, it's like, all right, well, you want to be the guy after the guy, which sort of is James Franklin because he took over for Bill O'Brien, took over for Joe Paterno. But then it's like, well, I think the way things have gone, Penn State's still in a damn good position. They just, so I said, I feel like this team's broken. Whether he lost the locker room, whether this, whether that, this team is just broken. Like, there is, I don't think there's any coming back from this anymore, especially after today, because they've been trying to bounce back for just not one game, but 2 games, because they've lost now 3 in a row after the first loss. So it's just, they're in a tough situation, but, a good situation if it opens, and then if they make the right hire, which everybody's going to have their, own opinion on that, on whether one, he should be fired or should stay, and be the coach, or, they hired this person or that person. So let me know in the comments below before I move on. One, do you think James Franklin should be fired? Or do you think he leaves on his own accord? And then, if he's no longer the head football coach at Penn State, who do the Lions hire to replace? So, and we're going to get into potential candidates here. I get the title says what it says. But I had to put something there. I had to think of something, on the fly because I wasn't planning on doing this tonight. I wasn't. But they lost again. And then, not saying I was expecting to win, but normally, like I said, I would have done this, say, at the end of the live stream, but I said, no, fuck it. I'm just gonna, make a separate video for it, and that's that. So here we are once again, and thanks for tuning in and watching. But, you look at, obviously potential candidates, from here to Timbuktu, it's just, Penn State is Penn State. I mean, in rural Pennsylvania, a cow town, if you will, that's been built up, because of football. Obviously, Penn State's damn good at wrestling. Hockey's come around after, being amateur hockey at the club level, and now they're seemingly a powerhouse in Division I for men's ice hockey, for that matter now too. So, but Penn State is and always has been and always will be a football school. Okay, academics obviously top notch, I might add, as well, but look around. It's blue and white Penn State football. There's 40,000 people, give or take, that live in, say, State College, surrounding areas. throughout the year. And then that's going to double because of the students. And then, State College turns into the third largest city in all of Pennsylvania, behind Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, from the eastern to the western, now central PA here in Happy Valley. Third largest city on game days with 100,000, 110,000 inside of Beaver Stadium. Because remember, the stadium never always, looked the way it, does now, and obviously they're in a renovation process that's going to be completed by the start of the 2027 season. So they started it after last year, then all this year, it's going to be all next year, and then into the following year a little bit, and it's going to look damn good when it's all said and done. And it's like, well, add that into the discussion of a football coach. Is it still going to be James Franklin, at that point in time, or is it going to be somebody else? I would have to think the latter at this rate, once again, just the way things have gone. Seriously, it's been piss poor pathetic for Penn State football. And like they have no identity. There's no rhythm. They shoot themselves in the foot way too goddamn much. And like I said, if it ain't one thing, it's another. With performance, in a job, like if you're not doing your job, they're gonna let you go. Okay, that's just life. But then you look at sports, and well, same thing for the most part, especially if you're the head man, the main boss. And other than the president and the athletic director at Penn State, yeah, there's other professors and all the students, but coaches for the other athletic teams as well. James Franklin is right now, still currently, the head football coach of the Penn State Lions, but I don't think that's going to be the case too much longer. So I'll shut up with whatever the hell you want to call the first, half hour, 45 minutes of this, with, discussing, what's got us to this point for the most part. Because you look at James Franklin, comes in after, 3 successful seasons at Vandy. Vandy's a tough place to win. And yeah, they're winning this year right now under Clark Lee. But Vandy hasn't really won since James Franklin was there. And you have all that time in between. Obviously, he's been here at Penn State. But, from a 7-win season in 14, they got the sanctions lifted, got scholarships back, got the bowl ban lifted as well, went to the Pinstripe Bowl, beat Boston College in overtime on a game-winning extra point because BC had missed theirs, if you recall. 31-30 was your final score, but, another 7-win campaign in 15, and it's like, all right, well, is he, the guy or not? And then they're 2-2, in mid of 2016, mid-October, and had already lost to Pitt and got ass kicked at Michigan in the Big House, and it took overtime to beat that Minnesota team. Saquon Barkley, arguably James Franklin's best recruit and player he's had under and during his tenure here at Penn State. Don't want to, sell him out. Okay, yeah, he's the one guy, but he sort of has been the one guy. And obviously don't want to sell anybody else short for everybody that's played under him. But I guess there's been some talk, too, that from former players, whether that be under, Joe Paterno to Bill O'Brien, to James Franklin, and a few who very well played for all three head coaches, I might add, and the two interims of Tom Bradley and Larry Johnson, that James Franklin very well has hit his peak at Penn State, which is not a good thing, because then it's all fucking downhill from there. And it's been downhill, snowball headed for hell the past 3 fucking weeks. They were 3-0, and now they're 3-3. So, but remember, they beat Minnesota in overtime in 16, and then the blocked field goal, returned for a touchdown, Marcus Allen and Grant Haley, changed the trajectory of the season and the last 9-10 years for the future at that point in time until now for Penn State football, no doubt about it. Because then Penn State went on to win the Big Ten championship. Tough loss to USC in that Rose Bowl. But then, from then until when COVID hit, a lot of successful seasons. And once again, you got to go through the bad to get to the good. So, I mean, Penn State's been through hell before. I'm not saying they need to, get back to purgatory or, go to heaven again for that matter. But once again, sometimes you got to go through, bad to get to the good. And in 20, they started 0-5 before they won 4 in a row. And I talked about Franklin once again at the end of the 15 season and mid 16 before they went and won the Big Ten, that he probably should be gone, and he's still here. But then you start 0-5 and 20. I get, they weren't going to play football at all, but then everybody else was, so the Big Ten was like, oh no, well shit, we probably should be playing too, even though we didn't want to, because they realized about money, and even though the fans really weren't allowed to attend, TV contracts and this and that. I don't count the 20 season as a losing season for Penn State. I don't. Definitely going to have to count 25 if it turns, into that. They're 3-3 right now. I mean, if they go 3-3 down the stretch, they're 6-6. That's just bowl eligible. But and they might get to that point. They might not. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll have to see how they play down the stretch. But there's, like I said, the schedule ain't getting any fucking easier. But talked about it, after started 0-5. That in 20 that he, probably should, move on elsewhere, and Penn State is going to be looking for somebody else, to be coaching them. But they finished 4-0 down the stretch. Probably should have went to a bowl game, declined to do so because of the situation, that was going on. But from then until into 21, they start 5-0, so they won 9 straight. And then it's like, you just didn't know what the hell team was showing up. Is it this team? Is it that team? And then they shit the bed down the stretch. I believe it was 6 of 8 they lost. They lost to Arkansas in the Outback Bowl. And we talked about it then again, too. And if you don't believe me with anything I'm saying, let alone any potential names of candidates that I'm going to name off, that some have changed, some haven't. If you don't believe me, go check out old videos, okay? Or check social media. Or, if you know me personally, or if don't know me personally, but somebody, connected to me, you'll know, in the long run, my feelings. But, in 22 then, they go win the fucking Rose Bowl. And it's like, all right. But then they lose in the Rose Bowl last week to UCLA, because that's their own home stadium. And it's like, no, like, this is over. Like I said, it's not a matter of if, but when. Especially after today, once again, that James Franklin's going to be gone one way or another, I feel. But 10-2, make it 11-2 with the Rose Bowl win in 22. Another 10-win season in 23. New Year's Six Bowl appearance, and then they made the playoff last year. Okay, and won in the first round, won in the next round, and then lost, in the Final Four, as they were a couple plays away from playing for and potentially winning a national championship last year, for God's sakes. And then we're not having this conversation right now, because then that just heals everything. Because that's the thing, when you're winning, because that's what matters, obviously. That's what people care about, and rightfully so. But there's no talk, when you're winning, because everything's going great, and a win's a win at the end of the day. When you're losing, hell's on fire, and it's bad, because losing sucks. But what I'm getting at is now here into 2025, and James Franklin has Penn State at 3-3. It's just a fucking roller coaster. It's up and down, up and down, up and down, and you just don't know what you're gonna get. And I mean, you damn well know what is going to be coming out of his mouth as the car salesman that he is, because, and this is James Franklin, he has been quoted saying he obviously gets it. Okay, not me, myself, and I, quoting Luke 96. But James Franklin, obviously I get it. I don't think so. Not anymore. Not with the way, this is, started to go. Because it's just, once again, the same old shit. Just another different fucking day. What's new? I mean, seriously. And that's why I've said, I just feel like this has run its course, and it's done and over with, and it's time to, pack up, move on, and both sides, be done with it. Cut him the check, or if he leaves, okay, you're saving money, or if there's something in between, then okay, that too. But just as long as James Franklin is no longer the Penn State football head coach, whether that's, once again, after tonight, tomorrow, after next weekend's game, because you got a bye week, after that, and then a whole month of November. But just as long as he's no longer the head football coach at Penn State, moving into 2026, at this point in time right now, I'll be fine with that. Obviously, everybody has their own opinions on, potential replacements, though. And we're going to get into the names. Because there's a handful that it's like, ain't happening because it's not 2012 or 2014. Or, no, ain't happening because of this reason or that reason. Or, nope, don't want. Or, yeah, they'd be good, but would they leave their, current school? Or, yes, he's the number one guy, home run hire. Because you can look at it just a lot of different fucking ways. Obviously, I'm not making the decision. Penn State football is, from the university to the board of trustees, and, on down the line. But if they fired Joe Paterno with 409 wins, I get the situation. But then O'Brien, left after 2 years. And then, you go back to the 14 coaching carousel. I mean, if you really think about it, Franklin probably was the best hire. Because other coaches, then didn't work out, so great for big time schools, from what I can recall. So, I mean, it's lasted this long, should have lasted this long. I mean, I don't know, but it has. So it has. It is what it is, because he's won as much as he has. Like, he's kept his job, for this reason or that reason, from winning to, no, I'm going to leave, or, you guys better sign me to an extension, and, kiss ass here and kiss ass there. And I mean, that's sort of why Penn State's in the predicament of the $6 million buyout right now, because of former athletic director Sandy Barber, who signed James Franklin to a 10-year contract at the end of the 21 season. And he really only has $500,000 being paid to him from the university, because $6.5 million is coming from other resources to be the head football coach, and then there's $1 million life insurance. So he's making $8 million a year, and then there's bonuses on top of that. If this happens or whatever the case may be, and then with $56 million, because he's only a couple years into that, that's what's left. That's what they're going to owe him if they fire him. That's what the buyout is, okay? It goes down to $48 million on January the 1st. So that's why I said as well recently, it's like, at this rate, what the fuck is $8 million, to a university that has money? They act like they don't, but they have money. And, to fire him now or fire him later, like, it doesn't matter. It's like, if you're going to do it, do it. And the $2 million that comes into play here is what he'd owe Penn State if he'd leave on his own accord. Okay? So it's obviously, a wide margin for the difference there of, well, okay, we're going to fire him, we got to pay him, or let him leave, and, that's what he owes, or do they come to some sort of mutual agreement in between? Like I said, he's not, I don't feel like, gonna go away, lightly. This might get messy. I mean, if you've been divorced, you know what I'm talking about, because it all comes down to money. But because he's going to want them to fire him. He is. Because he's like, if you're going to fire me, because then he's going to get paid. And kudos to his fucking agent on that. For Penn State having and gave him the contract they gave him. But that's from Sandy Barber. Pat Kraft is now the new athletic director at Penn State, and has been for a couple years. And he's a former Indiana Hoosier, former Big Ten football player in Bloomington. And, I mean, he knows football, he knows athletics. He's got Penn State going in a damn good direction, I feel like, as the AD. But the thing is, as I said, the school's still going to make the decision. I'm not. So, if he leaves, he leaves. But where's he going to go? I don't know. I don't care. But one way or another, this needs to be over. So if you're going to fire him and pay him. If you're going to let him walk, let him walk. I don't need and don't want to be reading an article or seeing in the news that James Franklin has signed another extension to remain at Penn State. No, I don't fucking think so. No. No thanks. Okay? I get, once again, grass ain't always greener on the other side, but like I said, after last week's loss, I feel like, once again here tonight, I feel like it's time to just move on. Both sides, clean slate. He goes and does what he does elsewhere, and Penn State decides to do what they do with whoever they'd end up hiring. So I'll leave it at that. I don't really think there's much else to be said in that regard. Like I said, half hour, 45 minutes, almost an hour now of me just still getting us to this point of, well, where do we go from here? One of those situations. So, yeah, just Penn State's in a, I mean, you heard the booze. I feel like everybody's had enough. So time for a change, and pay up. And I mean, he'll laugh to the bank, and rightfully so. I think anybody would. But this is nothing new in sports. Coaches get fired all the time. Somebody replaces them. You know, there's money being transferred here, money being transferred there, you know, from a buyout to, okay, well, we still got to pay this guy that's, you know, coming in and everything else. But I guess let's get into some names. Just obviously we'll see what happens at the end of the day, but it's not so happy in Happy Valley right now. Dark times over Penn State football, but Penn State's been through some, you know, hard dark times before, so they'll be fine. And we'll all, hopefully, that's from me to you, but I know I'll still be supporting this team regardless, one way or another, bleeding blue and white, from being born into this earth until the day I die. And we are Penn State. For the glory of Old State, we are held to the Lions. So obviously this hasn't happened yet. James Franklin is still currently the head football coach at Penn State, but I don't think he's going to be around too much longer. So here is a list of some potential candidates for Penn State football to replace James Franklin to become the head football coach of Penn State. So I had to say all that to say this, because going into 2026 now, it ain't going to be going into 2012 or 2014 anymore, okay? So there were some names, because remember, O'Brien took over for Joe Paterno, and then Franklin took over for Billy Bob, who's currently at Boston College. Remember, he left Penn State for the Houston Texans and then was fired before he worked his way back up as an assistant. But yeah, he's up at BC and close to home with his family. But like I said, it's not going to be, I don't think, any candidates. I mean, there might be one just because, but I don't think that it'd be right. But nobody from, 12 or 14 is, I think, going to be in consideration. I mean, maybe not. It's all about connections, in life. And, there are people who know people, that with these names I'm going to name. But that are, well, whether they were there before or not, or whether they're there now, or whatever the case may be, you'll understand after I'm done talking here tonight. At least I'd hope. I'm going to try to explain this best I can with what I know personally. And if you know me personally, I am one of the biggest football fans out there. At least I like to think so. But I mean, I live and breathe sports. I live and breathe football, and I'm a diehard blue and white, Penn State football fan. So, like, living nearby, obviously, I feel like I have a good grasp on, university and just the football team in general, based off of history, and just, okay, well, maybe not, but because I don't want to pat myself on the back, or everybody has their own opinion. I'm not saying I'm right, so and I'm not going to say I'm not saying I'm wrong either, because I'll admit, there's been times I have been right, I've been wrong, and it's this thing called life, and it goes on one way or another, and you learn from mistakes. I don't think they're going to give James Franklin, a chance to right the wrongs at this rate. They've had a couple chances now to right the ship and right this season. So, but yeah, it ain't 2012 and ain't 2014 anymore. Okay? So, I mean, people would probably welcome Bill O'Brien back, no doubt about it. And I'm not saying that, it wouldn't be a bad idea, but he right now at Boston College isn't, doing so great. They're about 500. And I mean, he was already here for 2 years. He knows what it's like. Would he come back? I don't know. Maybe. You'd have to call him up and ask him. But he's from Boston, and I mean, we've seen schools recently, though, they bring back somebody who, whether they fired or he walked away or whatever the case may be, and then whether trip 2 is, as good, if not better or worse than the first stint, then yeah, just one of those situations. But I feel like he's content at Boston College, and I don't think he would come back even if they considered him, which I don't think at this rate they would. Not saying he wasn't a damn good coach. He is, and he was at Penn State. O'Brien's Lions, he came into arguably the toughest situation ever in college football history, replacing Joe Paterno, who is the all-time winningest wins leader in college football history with 409 wins, and arguably the best college football coach of all time as well, depending on who you ask. But and they had obviously no scholarships for the most part, this and that, and they went 8-4 and 7-5, and then he went back to the NFL, where he came from, to take the Penn State job, because remember, he was the offensive coordinator with the Patriots, and then he goes to become the head coach of the Houston Texans. Before they fired him, like I said, he worked his way back up as an assistant, was at Alabama, and then back with the Patriots, and then he took the Boston College job. So he stays at Boston College, long story short. Because also in 2012, 2014, obviously Penn State just lost to Northwestern here today, but former Northwestern head coach Pat Fitzgerald, his name had came up for the Penn State gig a lot on, who's going to replace Joe. And he stayed at Northwestern. And then obviously he got fired over the summer a couple years ago. There was a lawsuit. I believe it's over with, but he hasn't coached college football since. I believe he's coached high school football with his kids, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so it won't be Pat Fitzgerald. Kirk Ferentz at Iowa, he's a Pittsburgh guy. He just became the all-time winningest head coach in Big Ten football history, surpassing Woody Hayes earlier this year. And, he's been in Iowa City for 25 plus years now. So he didn't leave in 12 or 14 for that matter, and he ain't going to be leaving now. So you can cross Kirk Ferentz off the list. Kyle Whittingham at Utah, he replaced Urban Meyer going into 2005, 20 years ago. And obviously Penn State defeated Utah in the Rose Bowl a couple years ago. And out there in the Great Salt Lake, they already have a coach in waiting to replace him. So he ain't leaving Utah, as he played at BYU. And the Mormon Bowl is next week. But a couple other coaches, from the 12-14 period that is a no, other than, like I said, maybe the one, and I'll get to him last, before we dive into names currently from yes, no, maybe so, and then my top 5 with a couple wild cards. But you have, or had, Gary Patterson at TCU. Well, they fired him. Sonny Dykes has been in Fort Worth ever since. And Gary Patterson has not been a head coach since. So, no to him. And then, I'm not saying he wasn't, good a coach, because he is. I mean, TCU and Boise State, Chris Peterson, who then went to Washington, he works in TV right now with Fox. They've just been out of the game, for a while. I'm not saying they still couldn't coach, but they had those programs back, obviously still under the BCS before the 14 playoff, and then the 12-team playoff last year. But as that non-Power 5 team that very well could make a run, because those teams were good from Boise to TCU, but it won't be them. These guys would have made sense, over a decade ago, but Penn State went a different direction. Because it felt like in 12, they wanted to get as far away as they possibly could from anybody associated with Joe Paterno. Same thing in 14, because everything was still fresh. Time's come and gone, though, now, so keep that in mind. We are Penn State, and, Penn State has the largest alumni association in the world. But Dan Mullen, I guess, probably would be the one from 12-14. That could still be in consideration now, because he is from Philly, and at the time he was at Mississippi State. He's a former offense coordinator under Urban Meyer at Utah and Florida, which ultimately, after Florida won those 2 national championships in 3 years back in 06 and 08 with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow, he got the Mississippi State job, and then had Dak Prescott down in start Vegas. And, then after Florida opened, because they've gone through their hardships, and they still are, for that matter. I'm just thinking here for a minute, but Dan Mullen went to Florida, okay? But then they fired his ass, and then he worked in TV the past couple years until he just took the UNLV job. Maybe Dan Mullen's name comes up again. I think he'd probably be the only one that was in consideration before. That would probably be in consideration again. Along with O'Brien, if so, as he's the former head coach. Al Golden, obviously, former Penn Stater, took over at Temple and then left for Miami, but then got fired by the Canes about a decade ago and hasn't been a head coach since. Okay. He was actually in the running alongside James Franklin to take over in 14 as the final 2 candidates, and Penn State hired James Franklin. So it wouldn't have been, not even a year and a half, 2 years later after that Al Golden was fired by the U. And then he's worked his way back up as an assistant in the NFL with the Lions and the Bengals. And then was most recently the defense coordinator at Notre Dame and was DC for the Fighting Irish last year when they beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl. And then now he's back in the NFL as the current defense coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. But it won't be Al Golden. If he ever does come back to Penn State, I feel like, depending on if they would hire a certain person, that, because fill in the blank, I'll get to him later, was an assistant under Al Golden at Temple, that maybe Al Golden would return the favor and be an assistant under him at Penn State, if that would happen. Because then you'd have, a couple head coaches there, knowing what the hell is going on and knowing what it takes, to win at Penn State. And, back to the 12-14 situation real quick because it's not going to be former assistants, whether that be under Joe, under O'Brien, under James, or current assistants for that matter, from Andy Kotelnicki to Jim Knowles, who I said earlier today, if Franklin, I might have said it tonight too, I don't know, at this rate, if potentially somehow, some way Franklin keeps his job, there will be scapegoats in the assistants. And Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles, I think, will both be gone at this rate, the way they played. But if Franklin's gone, they're gone as well, so it doesn't matter. So it's not going to be them, and it's not going to be Tom Bradley, who was the interim after Joe before O'Brien got the job, and it's not going to be Larry Johnson, who's currently the defensive line coach at The Ohio State, who was the interim in between O'Brien and Franklin. And then Franklin decided not to keep him, as O'Brien did with Ron Vanderlyn, if you recall. But then, Franklin brought in his own guys, a lot of the same staff he had at Vandy, and Larry Johnson's been at Ohio State since. So it's not going to be them. And I don't want to hear any talk either of, well, it needs to be this former NFL coach. Okay, here we go, Steelers, here we go, yeah. But Bill Cowher's name came up for the Penn State job after Joe Paterno. And yeah, okay, one for the thumb. But he's fine with CBS and the NFL today. He ain't moving. He ain't going anywhere. He hasn't returned to coaching since he retired from the Steelers almost 20 years ago, for God's sake. So, and John Gruden's name keeps coming up for all these jobs. No, I don't think so. Normally, it's college coaches don't fare well in the NFL, but as of late, I mean, look at Bill Belichick in North Carolina right now. That's not faring out, shaking out too well down in Chapel Hill either. So, yeah, no to John Gruden. No. And then you look at other former assistants, these under James Franklin, from offensively to defensively, whether they were an assistant or a coordinator, they've gone on to become head coaches. Joe Moorhead was the OC. Remember, he was the head coach at Fordham when he hired him as the OC. And, they had him in 16 and 17, and then he went to become the head coach at Mississippi State before they drug his Yankee ass out of Starkville. He actually replaced Dan Mullen, I might add. But he went on to Oregon to become the OC, and then he's been the Akron head coach since, but they're just zipping it up in Zipland with the Zips and not winning. So he ain't winning at Mississippi State, let alone Akron. He's not going to win at Penn State. He's a better coordinator than he is a head coach. Brent Pry, defense coordinator under Franklin at Vandy and at Penn State up until he left for Virginia Tech. He just got fired about a month ago. I'm surprised to this rate that Franklin, before the losing streak started and occurred and is still ongoing, that they didn't bring him back, to be some sort of analyst on this staff. But Brent Pry is getting a check from his alma mater, no longer being the head coach of the Hokies. But then you have Ricky Ronnie, who is an offense coordinator at Penn State. He's the current head coach at Old Dominion. He was the one who actually beat Brent Pry in Virginia Tech and got his ass fired. So it ain't going to be Jim Moore. It ain't going to be Brent Pry. It ain't going to be Ricky Ronnie. Charles Huff, he left Penn State as the running backs coach to be the running back coach at Alabama under Nick Saban. Before then he got the Marshall gig. And then there was a fiasco with the Thundering Herd at the end of last year with contract this and contract that. And then they ended up hiring somebody else instead. And then he went on to become right now in his first year at Southern Miss. But it ain't going to be Charles Huff. I mean, I'm still kicking the tires on Manny Diaz. But I keep circling back around to no. Because if you recall, he was and is a damn good defensive coordinator. But then at Miami, he had it going in, the right direction, but then it went downhill, and then, got fired. And remember, he was going to take the Temple head coaching job. Temple, okay, in Philly. And Franklin scooped him up, and he was the defense coordinator then at Penn State for a few years before then he left just recently for Duke. So Manny Diaz is at Duke. Tom Allen replaced. He left for Clemson. Now you got Jim Knowles. So Franklin's gone through more offensive coordinators than he has defensive coordinators. And has won as much as he has, but also lost, almost half that amount now at this rate. I believe it's 104-45, if I'm not mistaken, after the loss today. If anybody wants to look into that for me, let me know in the comments below. Greatly appreciated. But I don't feel like it's going to be any of those guys. Okay? I just don't. And then you have a couple other guys before we get into my top, candidates. And if you didn't already look at the thumbnail, well, now's your chance. But Greg Schiano's name came up for Penn State in 12 and 14. So did Troy Calhoun. Mark Stoops' name has been, going around, but, they're not really winning a hell of a lot. Schiano won at Rutgers his first stint, but then made the mistake of going to the NFL and then had to work his way back up as an assistant. He was at Ohio State before then he retook the Rutgers gig before COVID. But, I mean, they're winning a little bit, but not much, And Schiano at Penn State, just as he's a former Penn State assistant, I might add, just no. He's better off at Rutgers, okay? And Troy Calhoun's winning a little bit at Air Force, but not as much as he was. Mark Stoops was going to leave Kentucky for Texas A&M and then backed out at the 11th hour. And then stayed in Lexington, and then, well, we'll see how that shakes out. He might even be getting fired himself, as he's brother Bob Stoops, former Oklahoma head coach. And then there's another brother who was at Arizona. PJ Fleck's a coach that before too long he's going to leave Minnesota. But if you think James Franklin is a car salesman, well then let me welcome you and introduce you to PJ Fleck. So no. And then, Dave Doran, NC State head coach, former Wisconsin defensive coordinator. No, he would have been, maybe a couple years ago. Who else we got here? At Kansas and Kansas State, Lance Leipold and Chris Kleiman, they both won at lower levels in college football. I believe Leipold was at Wisconsin Whitewater, if I'm not mistaken, before he went to Buffalo, and then he's been at Kansas. And he stayed with KU and the Jayhawks, but, who knows? Maybe probably should have left recently, but he didn't. Chris Kleiman won at North Dakota State. We know how the Bison, or the Bisons, have fared throughout time. And, okay, maybe, but probably not. Eli Drinkowitz at Mizzou, no thanks. He's better off down south. He was at App State before taking over for the Tigers. Speaking of Tigers, with Auburn and LSU, Hugh Freeze, Brian Kelly, no. Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss, had the situation go on there. and then he was at Liberty, and now he's with Auburn. Brian Kelly, he's bounced around. Obviously, the longest tenured of his coaching history, his coaching career was at Notre Dame before he just left for LSU a couple years ago. And they might, depending on what happens, they might be wanting to move on from him. So, I mean, Kalen DeBoer would be one, if he was still at Washington, and didn't leave for Alabama, that I think I'd probably have in a top, whatever number list of candidates, because, I mean, he was, pretty good as the IU OC right before COVID. Tom Allen was the head coach, not Tim Tolman, Tim Allen, but Tom Allen, and then obviously Tom Allen was the Penn State defense coordinator last year. But remember, DeBoer went to Fresno, and then went to Washington, and then he takes over for Saban when everybody thought it was either going to be Mike Norvell at Florida State or Dan Lanning at Oregon, and it ended up being Kalen DeBoer. And at times they're ready to fire his ass out of Tuscaloosa as well. But they picked up a big win earlier today. Who else is there here? I mean, Dabo Swinney at Clemson, in a heartbeat if it was available, just because he's won. But he ain't leaving Clemson. He's not. Even though I get what he said earlier this year, like, hey, if they want to fire me, they can fire me. I'm going to go elsewhere and coach and win. So, and obviously he has won a couple national championships, might add, as well. So, I'd add, if Dabo was available, I'd add him to a top list of candidates for sure. Make sure I don't forget anything here before we really get into the top few here. Lane Kiffin's name's going to come up just because his name comes up for fucking everything. And he has moved on after a couple years after each stint, whether he got fired or, decided to move on his own. But I don't feel like Lane Kiffin would be a good fit at Penn State. He's too glitzy, he's too glamour, too flamboyant. I don't think Lane Kiffin would fare well at Penn State. I just don't. I think that'd be more so for, in a different universe, for the fans to, want and enjoy. But overall, football, I'm not saying he's a, bad coach. It's just, because it's all, about fit. Because there's sometimes you hear coaches, well, yeah, they took this job, but then timing might have been off, or alignment might have been off, or whatever the case might be, and it's just, it's not going to work out then. It's like it's a dumpster fire waiting to happen. One of those. So, yeah, hard no, pass on Lane Kiffin. No thanks. Even though he did beat Penn State with Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl a couple years ago, I might add. But, yeah, that does it for that. And now it's, all right, into the top 5 with a couple wild cards. So, before we do get into that, though, I want to say thank you for tuning in and watching as we discuss Penn State football. So be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on social media. Links in the description below. Thumbs up button, share. Chat questions and comments, super chat, super sticker, super like, super thanks. Always greatly appreciated as well. Go check out Rogue Energy, HopeKThrifts, and Dead and Hungry. Scan the QR code or click the first top link in the description below if you haven't done so already. And if available, if there's a hype button on your end, on your YouTube screen right now, be sure to hit the hype button. So, top 5 potential coaching candidates to replace James Franklin, if, but more so than not now, when he's no longer the head football coach at Penn State. Because I don't think he's going to be anymore. I don't. I've talked about this once again a handful of times throughout the past, went into detail about it last week, was going to go into more detail about it, tonight after the game at the end of that stream. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm like, no, I'm just going to make a separate video for it. So here we are. But my top 5, and we'll work from 5 down to 1. And then, we'll do the 2 wild cards first. How about that? And then we'll work our way down. 5, 4, 3, 2. And 1 for the We Are Penn State Blue and White Nittany Lions. So the 2 wild cards. First, we'll start with Urban Meyer. Obviously, he was at Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, and then took over Ohio State in 2012. But from what I have heard, what I know, from what I remember, Urban Meyer was this close to accepting and taking the Penn State job to replace Joe Paterno at the end of the 2011 season, 2012 campaign. But in the meantime, he's from Ohio, okay, and was a former assistant at Ohio State, was at Notre Dame there for a little bit. His name's come up for that job in the past, among a few other jobs. But in 2012, Ohio State was also open after their tattoo scandal with Terrell Pryor following Jim Tressel's tenure, as he's now and this is no lie, Jim Tressel is the lieutenant governor of the state of Ohio and was going to run for governor, but decided not to. But still next in line. Second in charge for the former Buckeye head coach. Urban's loved in Ohio. I don't think he'd want to piss anybody off at this rate, even though he hasn't been coaching since before COVID. But yeah, he was, I guess, damn near close to accepting the Penn State job to replace Joe. But Ohio State was also open, and he took that job instead. So then Penn State ended up hiring, Bill O'Brien. And, Urban, in year 1, they went undefeated, but because of those sanctions, they couldn't go to a bowl game. Year 2, they went and played Clemson in the Orange Bowl. Year 3, they went and won the College Football Playoff National Championship as the 4 seed, defeating Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and then beat Oregon in the National Championship, and then had damn good teams, his whole entire time in Columbus. And, he beat Penn State when he was at Florida in the Outback Bowl. That was actually the last time until today Penn State wore the white stripe on the uniform, and then they brought it back with the Generations of Greatness throwbacks today, I might add. And then, Urban, at the end of the, 18 season? 19 season? 18 season. It was January 19. He decided to retire. And it's like, all right, well, is he done here for good? Is he, going to coach again? Well, he did end up coaching again. He went to the NFL, coached Jacksonville Jaguars, but that didn't last long because the Khan family and AEW got sick of his shit and super kicked his ass back to Fox. And Urban's been working for Fox and Big Noon Kickoff ever since he retired from Ohio State, even though he, had a short tenure in Duval with the Jags. But he hasn't coached in college since Ohio State. I mean, I feel like you'd either be on one side of the aisle or the other with Urban Meyer potentially coming to Penn State. Urban's always had a lot of off the field, stuff. So that might be a reason why Penn State, didn't want to hire him in the first place. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows other than, him and maybe a few other people. I'd welcome him. I would, because I know what type of coach he is, and what he's capable of, and that's winning, and that's what matters. Okay, the rest will sort itself out. So, um, yeah, Urban Meyer would be a wild card, and then Nick Saban would be the other wild card. Um, Nick Saban, he's from West Virginia. Um, has always looked up to Joe Paterno, and what Joe Pa did with the blue and white. Obviously, Saban, a Kent State grad, worked his way up as an assistant and head coach at Toledo, was a defense coordinator under Bill Belichick in the Cleveland Browns. Before then, he went to Michigan State. So he's coached in the Big Ten, and he's coached against Penn State, and he's beat Penn State a couple times. Lost to him as well, but then, he left East Lansing for Baton Rouge and went and won a national championship with LSU before he left for the NFL and the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, that didn't work out. He most definitely had more wins in college football than what he ended with as he retired just a couple years ago. But after Miami firing him, and the Dolphins really haven't been good since 1972. But that's neither here nor there. No team, for that matter, especially the NFL, but college, even now too, with as long as the season is, it's hard to go undefeated. So who knows if anybody ever will again? As they popped the champagne last week, but Nick Saban was at Miami with the Dolphins, not the U, but the Dolphins. And he's always brought up, or the conversation's always been, well, if they would have signed Drew Brees over Dante Culpepper, who knows what could have been? Especially with Brees going to New Orleans and winning the Super Bowl after a couple of years. But Miami fired him, and then obviously Alabama had Bear Bryant back in the day. Nick Saban goes to Tuscaloosa, and the rest is history there. From 07 on, they won a national championship a few years in, and won a few more after that, as he has 6 national championships total. 1 at LSU, 5 at Alabama, and 6 overall total. And even with the 295 wins, I believe he has, he still isn't the all-time winningest wins leader in college football this year. That's Joe Paterno with 409. But then he retired from Alabama. Kalen DeBoer replaced. He's been working in TV as well the past couple years with ESPN for College Game Day. And, who knows if he'll ever, come back. Probably not, even with him being, 72, 75. He very well could, but I doubt it. The story is, rumor is at least, who knows how true it is, only he knows, and Miss Terry, but that he retired because of NIL, because of the control. You can't control the players anymore. Because college football is turning the NFL with NIL, and no doubt about it, there needs to be a salary cap. But that's the talk of, well, Saban needs to be like the president or the commissioner of, college football, because college football, the NCAA, whatever the hell is going to come out of it in the next couple years, because everybody argues that he's the GOAT, and rightfully so, everybody has their own opinion, but we are Penn State and JVP 409 forever. But I know damn well Urban Meyer, Nick Saban will not happen, but if it would, I'd support it in a heartbeat, no doubt. You got to at least call them up, kick the tires on it, if you will, and, just see what they have to say. Maybe they recommend somebody. I don't know. So those would be the 2 wild cards. Because also in this situation, it's money talks. Yeah, I get the money on the way out, but then there's money coming in, and it's like, well, fit-wise, this, that, the other, but obviously in the long run it'll all work itself out, but just you got to see what they have to say. You can't say no because of this. You don't know unless you ask. Okay, that's the main thing, as we all know in life. You'll never know. Even though I know it's not going to happen. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and bullshit with you and this and that. I'll know this is definitely, I'm all in, definitely going to happen. This is as realistic as it gets. You know what I mean? One of those. It's like, maybe if the timing was different, you know, say 13 years ago for Urban Meyer and I don't know, almost 20 years ago for Nick Saban. You know, who knows what could have been then? You know what I mean? Because remember, after 04, Penn State was thinking about firing Joe or letting him retire. And then 05 happened, you know, and they go win the Orange Bowl in triple overtime, you know, against Florida State, 26-23, after losing at Michigan with 1 second on the clock. 20 years to the day next week, hard to believe. And then the game-winning field goal at Iowa in 08, you know, before they went and lost the Rose Bowl to USC, as Mark Sanchez carved up the Lion defense, and yeah, just who knows what could have been. But that's not how it's worked out, you know, and it is what it is at the end of the day. Okay? So those are wild cards that I know aren't going to happen, but it doesn't hurt to add and then ask. But my top 5 now. Okay? Number 5, before we get into 4, and then I feel like the top 3 that I'm going to name off are all strong, realistic possibilities. Okay? 5 and 4, not so much. But they still made my top 5, along with, or minus, excuse me, all the other names I already mentioned that I'm like, no. Or, you know, maybe, but doubt it. Just no in general, at the end of the day. But 5 would be Shane Beamer. He's currently at South Carolina. He's the son of Virginia Tech legend Frank Beamer. But Virginia Tech's open right now. Okay? And he's winning at South Carolina. If he's winning at South Carolina, he can easily win at Virginia Tech. So he played there. He's going back to Blacksburg, be the Hokies head coach, if I'd have to bet on it. So cross his name off. And then 4, yeah, like I said, the top 3, as I look at this list again, yeah, the top 3 I feel like are real strong, realistic possibilities for sure. Especially with what's going on at Penn State and what's going on at their respective programs. We'll get to them in a minute, though. But 4 would be Matt Campbell at Iowa State. His name's come up for a lot of jobs in the past. A lot. Okay? Whether that be in the Big Ten, the Pac-12 when it was in existence. Obviously, they still have Oregon State and Washington State, but they're more so independents than anything else, scheduling who they play. Matt Campbell's name has come up for ACC and SEC jobs, let alone other Big 12 jobs, for that matter, before all this realignment. But he has stayed true to the Iowa State Cyclones. He has stayed put names. And, you know, it's like, well, what job would he leave for? You know, I don't know at this rate, because he has either said no to a lot of people, or he was never, you know, asked, offered, you know, where the case may be. Because that's the other thing, too, in contract negotiations. It's like, well, was this player or coach even asked or offered about the opportunity? Because to us, well, his name might be out there, but it's like, well, when it comes down to it, it's like, well, did he even get offered? You know, because if you get offered, then ball's in your court to, you know, make a decision. And then if you turn them down, then, you know, okay, you're staying, but if not, then it's just what it is. Um, but yeah, like, would Matt Campbell even leave Iowa State? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Um, the way NIL is nowadays, I mean, you can win at a not a smaller program, but just a place that you probably wouldn't think that would be winning a lot of football under, the old, format. But then also it's, well, if you're winning under the old format, you're probably winning under the new. But then there's some schools that aren't winning now that used to win before, or vice versa, you know, because of the money, because they're paying the players. But yeah, would Matt Campbell leave? I don't know. But my number one, okay, before I say 3 and 2, obviously I have at number one for a reason, because I think he would be the guy, okay? But if it came down to it, I'll say this before I get into 3 and 2. If it came down to it, and he decided to stay where he's at, and they had to, move elsewhere and look elsewhere for somebody else, and ended up hiring either who I have, second or third on the list, and nobody else, that'd be the only, part to it, hiccup to the whole situation, that I'd probably be fine and content with. I mean, I'm still going to support the team anyway, okay? From, Joe Paterno to Bill O'Brien to James Franklin, okay? Wasn't alive for Rip Engel. But, because remember, Joe was an assistant under Rip, and then got the head job. And that was the thing. It's like, well, Joe was here for 45, 46 years. And it's like, well, are they going to promote an assistant? Are they going to go elsewhere? What are they going to do? And they went to the outside, and then went to the outside again. And they'll most definitely be going to the outside again, but do they bring somebody, in that already knows the program, But 3 would be former Indiana, University of Pennsylvania, IUP, along with Elon and James Madison, current Indiana Hoosier head coach, and Kirk Cignetti. And if you don't know who he is, Google him, because he does win, and they picked up a big road win today. Actually, Indiana's first top 5 road win in program history. Okay, they went to Oregon and beat the Ducks, as Oregon was coming off of a bye after beating Penn State in the whiteout a couple weeks ago. So yeah, Kirk Cignetti wins, and he's a Pennsylvania guy. His father and brother Frank, and Frank Jr., football family. His dad actually followed Bobby Bowden at West Virginia, and it didn't go so good. But then his dad was the IUP head coach, as Indiana, not the state, but Indiana, Pennsylvania, right down the road from Happy Valley, about an hour and a half, 2 hours, east of Pittsburgh and Johnstown, in between Altoona and Johnstown, if you look on a map. And if you know the state, you know what I'm talking about. Or if you know IUP, and Indiana Hoosier football with Kirk Cignetti, you know who I'm talking about. But yeah, Sig, I mean, I'd roll on up in a heartbeat and smoke it with him becoming the head football coach at Penn State. Because, I mean, he does one. I get he's, 62, 63 years old. But it's like, at this rate, I mean, age does matter, but it doesn't. It's that fine line of, well, do you want to hire an old coach but nobody really, wanted him because of that. And then Indiana took a chance on him out of James Madison. And Indiana's a top 10 program in college football right now. They're arguably probably the best they've ever been. And they've had some good, football seasons in the past. Not so much as of late, you know. But, I mean, because Indiana's more of a basketball school than they are a football school. But under Kirk Cignetti, he's the next Bobby Knight in Bloomington for the Hoosiers. I mean, seriously, at this rate, if he keeps winning. And he did just re-sign an extension, I might add. I don't know anything about a buyout number, on what it would take. Because that's what I said once again. Buyouts are, well, the number you always hear is, well, this is what it's going to take for the school to fire somebody. But then there's also the number of, well, this is the number that if he leaves, he's going to owe. But then the school he's going to or the place he's going to, they're going to fucking pay that anyway. That's the thing. So then that's what I've always said. If they leave on their own, you use that money to go hire somebody else. But yeah, Kirk Cignetti at Indiana, I think would do well at Penn State. I get he has that, cocky attitude that might not, with all of Penn State fans, sit over, too well. But he doesn't like Pitt. I don't know how much he likes Penn State either, but because, like I said, his dad coached at West Virginia. He actually played at West Virginia, I might add, if I'm not mistaken. But former Saban assistant, before too long, he's going to be leaving Indiana. Okay? It's just a matter of where to. But maybe not. He's got Indiana in a damn good spot. Maybe he doesn't want to leave. I don't know. But Kirk Cignetti would be my 3. And then 2 would be the head coach that he just beat today, who beat Penn State a couple weeks ago, and in the Big Ten Championship game last year, and Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. Lanning, another former Saban assistant, was actually a GA in Tuscaloosa with the Tide, but then was the defense coordinator under Kirby Smart at Georgia, which ultimately got him the Oregon job, because he has a couple national championship rings from Alabama to Georgia, and he's trying to win one out in Eugene with Oregon. But they lost today in a one-score game, but they'll be fine, just as we thought Penn State was going to be fine, though. They've now lost, twice since that Oregon lost, and 3 in a row total. But Dan Lanning's like that, one coach, like, really up and coming, even though he's made his mark with the Ducks. Would he ever leave? And say, go to the NFL, go here, go there. Well, first off, Oregon is Nike, but Oregon has also had previous head coaches leave Eugene to go elsewhere. Okay, which ultimately, got Oregon the chance to hire Dan Lanning after, from Chip Kelly leaving Oregon to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, Chip then went to the 49ers and then worked in TV for a little bit, and then UCLA head coach, and then got out of it as a head coach because of NIL, was the Ohio State offensive coordinator last year, back in the NFL with the Raiders right now as their OC. But then you had, Willie Taggart leave for Florida State. Mark Helfrich was in between. He's working for Fox right now. I'm not saying his name for anything. He was actually on the call for the Penn State game today, I might add. But Willie Taggart left for Florida State. And then Mario Cristobal left for Miami. I mean, that's his alma mater. Dan Lanning, would Dan Lanning leave Oregon? Probably not. He actually said it this past week, I might add, that he ain't ever leaving Oregon. Well, we'll see about that, because obviously money talks. But Oregon has Nike money. And the way NIL is now, and you're paying the players and this and that, it's like, you're going to have to pay up for Dan Lanning if you want him. So we'll see if he, ever does leave. But right now, it's probably a hard, solid no. But Dan Lanning would be one for sure. He beat Penn State, a couple weeks ago. And then Kirk Cignetti in Indiana, coming to Happy Valley for Penn State's next home game, as Penn State had 3 home games to start the year, had the bye week, haven't won since prior to that, lost 3 in a row, but then they go on the road next week, have a bye week, and then they go on the road again to begin November, and then another home game. So, yeah, that might be the other thing too, that James Franklin very well today could have coached, just not his last game as the Penn State football head coach, but last game inside of Beaver Stadium as well. Because if you recall, his first ever win at Penn State wasn't even inside of Beaver Stadium, nor on the road. It was a fucking neutral site game. As the Steelers played in Dublin, Ireland at Kirk Park a couple weeks ago, and they're coming off the bye tomorrow at home against the Cleveland Browns, Penn State defeated Central Florida in Ireland to begin the 2014 season. And that ties in with O'Brien and George O'Leary and Virginia back now the Penn State series in 12 and 13 and all that. Whether that's either here or there. But yeah, we've come a long way from 1966 to the end of 2011 to 12 and 13, and then January of 14 until now. From Joe Paterno to Bill O'Brien to James Franklin, and the number one candidate, I believe, for Penn State football to potentially replace James Franklin at the end of this 25 season, moving into 2026, is none other than Penn State alum, former linebacker in the mid-1990s, and former head football coach at Temple, Baylor, the Carolina Panthers in the National Football League, and current Nebraska Cornhusker head coach in Matt Roll. Roll grew up in the area, walked on at Penn State, and he knows what it takes to win in State College in the blue and white, having played for Joe Paterno, was a GA for a short time before he got into assistant coaching, and then obviously a head coach. But I've said in the past, if Matt Roll can win at Temple, and if Matt Roll can win at Baylor, and he's got Nebraska in a damn good spot right now, and they actually also as well come to Happy Valley for Penn State Senior Day in a little over a month, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, in the next last game of the year. So my top 3 all play at Penn State this year. So Nittany fans are seeing 3 potential, candidates on the opposing sideline that, hey, just maybe, we'll see. But that if Matt Roll could win at Temple and Baylor, along with, not so much in the NFL with Carolina Panthers, but, college football coaches very rarely work out in the NFL and vice versa, as mentioned. But he's back in college, and he's at Nebraska, and his buyout is $50 million, okay? But that is if he's fired. Number for him to leave, significantly lower. Don't have an exact number on that at the moment, because that's the thing with contracts. Some stuff is public knowledge, some stuff ain't, and then if it ain't, it's just a matter of fact if it gets leaked or not, and then, what's true and what's not. Like I said, the only people that know are university figures, the coaches, and the agents. So, and then maybe, family members and, shit like that. But the Penn State fans, the whole entire fan base, would no doubt about it, clearly support Matt Roll. Penn State, you go back to 94, they go undefeated and get gypped, screwed by Nebraska, as they won the Orange Bowl. Penn State won the Rose Bowl. But there was not a 1 versus 2 that year. And Nebraska, they were crowned national champions, and Penn State wasn't. Obviously, they had, played prior to that, and it's been a rivalry. Obviously, Nebraska joined the Big Ten in 2011. They've played a handful of times. Nebraska actually coming to Penn State next month for the first time since 2017, first meeting since 2020. But they had a home and home in 02 and 03, and went out to Lincoln Memorial Stadium and lost in 03. But the 02 season for Penn State, a lot of one-score losses, very well could have been a damn good season. If not, but they blew out Nebraska and Johnstown, PA native Frank Solich, who Nebraska actually fired, and they, for a time or two, really haven't been on track with their head coaches as they've moved on from Bill Callahan to Bo Pelini, a few others, including alum with Scott Frost. Had Mike Riley prior to him after he left Oregon State. But then they brought in, Matt Rule, Penn State guy. And, Matt Rule's winning in Nebraska right now. It's Matt Rule year 3 thing. Every year 3, wherever he's been, he's won. A good amount of games, I might add, as well. Because he's a program builder. But the thing I'll say about program builders, you're always hopefully building, because if you're not, you're not winning. You're always one thing at a time here. That's the thing with the 1-0 mentality, and it's just with Franklin falling off the face of the fucking earth. They've really gone downhill and gone downhill fast. But Matt Rule at Penn State, I've said his name a handful of times as a potential replacement. Obviously he wasn't a head coach yet in 11-12. He was still an assistant. But then he got the Temple gig in 13. He actually beat Penn State to start the 15 season off, I might add, but lost at Penn State in 14 and 16 when he was at Temple. But then, who knows? His name very well could have came up, for the Penn State job if Penn State would have moved on from Franklin, after 16, because then Matt Rule left Temple after 16 to go to Baylor. And so I said, if Matt Rule can win at Temple and Baylor, obviously he's winning at Nebraska, he can clearly win, at Penn State. But Baylor was in a, situation after a scandal of their own, and he went in there and, a couple years, they went and won the Big 12 and made a New Year's 6, but then he went to the NFL, and then, that didn't work out. And, from the ownership to the GM to, all the players playing, the NFL is a whole other world compared to college football. But you also, learn from your mistakes, obviously, at least I'd hope, and then you try to move forward. But, he's been at Nebraska now a couple years, and Nebraska hasn't won in quite a while, because of those, coaches, as I was mentioning. At least, big time, 10, 11, 12 games a year. They're good for, over the past 20 years, they have been, the 6, 7, 8, 9 games, but then they went through a slump there of, it's a disaster. And no bowl games and, everything else, but then they went to the Pinstripe Bowl last year. And Nebraska beat Bill O'Brien and Boston College, I might add. And Matt Rule's a New York City guy. He's born and raised in New York, but, they moved to Center County and State College, and, he went to State College, and, he walked on at Penn State. But as I was saying, Penn State has the opportunity right now, even though they didn't win the national championship in 1994. But go look at that button in 02 when they blew out the Cornhuskers and shucked them. Operation Visine. They kept the red out of Beaver Stadium that night. But settling the score for 94. Just tie that into if Penn State would hire Matt Rule, as the new head football coach. If James Franklin was no longer the head football coach, that would be, the fuck you, and he's no longer your head coach, but he's our head coach, and he's back home, and we are at Penn State. So that's why I said after Joe, they went outside and found Bill O'Brien and James Franklin. If they move on from Franklin, it's time to look outside, yes, but bring somebody that they know back home. And it's Penn State alum and former Temple, Baylor, and Carolina Panther head coach, current Nebraska Cornhusker head coach, and Matt Rule. So Matt Rule will be my number one candidate at Penn State. And I've been saying his name a lot over the past decade. If you don't believe me, go check out videos. I'm not bullshitting with you. I've probably been one of his biggest supporters, over that time. Because who knows? I mean, he left Baylor going into 20 and was in the NFL, and then Penn State had the shitty season in 20 and then in 21. It's like, well, does he leave the NFL and come back? Because his name came up then. But then Penn State goes win the Rose Bowl, and then, playoff last year, losing in the Final Four, and he's still there, potentially for the taking. So, and Pat Kraft, I might add, Penn State's current athletic director, knows Matt Rule very well. Pat Kraft was the athletic director at Temple when Matt Rule was the Temple Owl head coach. So they already have a connection. And like I said, it's all about connections. It's all about who you know. And it would be the perfect fit, be the perfect opportunity. And talk about timing. Timing has to align. Be the perfect time for Penn State to hire Matt Rule as the blue and white Penn State Lion head coach. So there's not really much else to be said. There's not. Other than we'll see what, ends up happening. Whether James Franklin stays or he goes. But move, bitch. Get out of the way. Move it on over and, take this job and shove it. I mean, we're not going to take it anymore. Seriously. Like, enough's enough. So, mentioned earlier, time for a change on both sides of, Penn State football and James Franklin as the head coach. And, those would be my top candidates, as mentioned, to potentially replace with wild cards of Urban Meyer and Nick Saban, and then also a top 5 from 5 down to 1, Shane Beamer, Matt Campbell, along with Kirk Cignetti, Dan Lanning, and Penn State alum Matt Rule. We are Penn State, and in the meantime, that'll do it for myself, your host, Encyclopedia Sports, Quinn Luke 96, live right here on YouTube. So thanks for tuning in and watching. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Links in the description below. Scan the QR code or click the first top link in the description below as well if you haven't done so already. But let me know in the comments below also what you thought and what you think, and all that. And just like I said earlier, one is James Franklin going to be the head football coach at Penn State moving forward, and if so, why? But 2, if he's not, who's it going to be to replace? Because Penn State's sitting at 3-3, and it's time to move on. At least in my opinion, it is. Enough is enough. And I think it's just not a matter of if, but officially when now. If it hasn't already happened since I've been live here on YouTube and haven't seen anything about it, which I highly doubt, but maybe by the end of the night, maybe by tomorrow, maybe next weekend, because they're going into a bye week, and then with another month to play, as mentioned, or, maybe at season's end. From a buyout to him leaving to mutual agreement, some, sort of, parting of ways to move Penn State football into 2026 and beyond. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's my take. If I have anything else to say about this situation, I might make a part 2. I might just add a comment in the comments. I'm sure I'll be talking about it more during live play watch along reaction streams, so be sure to tune into those. Yeah, we'll see what happens. But just as always, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for the support. Always greatly appreciated. But yeah, that'll do it for myself, your host, Encyclopedia Sports, Quinn, Luke 96. And let me know in the comments below what you think about what's going to happen once more. But hail to the Lions for the glory of Old State. We are Penn State. We are Penn State. We are Penn State. Thank you. And obviously I'll say you're welcome, as you know how the chant goes. But yeah, we are Penn State. And we'll see if James Franklin is the head football coach or not, and who it's going to be to replace if so. So that's what I've had to, say. Once again, let me know in the comments below your thoughts and opinions, and thanks for tuning in and watching. We are